8,000 people dead in a single night. That number still stands 125 years later as the deadliest natural disaster in American history. More than Katrina, more than the San Francisco earthquake, more than any flood, fire, or storm this country has ever seen. But here's what makes it truly devastating. They were warned. The storm was coming. Experts knew it. And the one man in the city whose job it was to sound the alarm had publicly declared just 9 years earlier that a hurricane of significant strength could never strike Galveston Island. So was this a natural disaster? Or a man-made catastrophe wearing nature's mask? Galveston, Texas, September 8, 1900. At the turn of the 20th century, Galveston is not just a city, it is a statement. Known as the Wall Street of the Southwest, it is one of the wealthiest cities in America, per capita. A booming port, ornate mansions, cotton exports that rival New York, a population of nearly 38,000. It sits on a long, flat barrier island, barely a large sandbar off the Texas Gulf Coast. Its highest point is 8 feet above sea level, 8 feet, and not a single seawall in sight. The storm begins life as a tropical wave off the coast of Africa in late August. By the time it crosses the Caribbean, it's already a monster, tearing through the Dominican Republic, raking Cuba, and accelerating across the Gulf of Mexico. Cuban meteorologists track it closely. They are some of the best in the world, operating out of the Belen College Observatory in Havana, considered one of the most advanced meteorological institutions on Earth at the time. Their conclusion is unambiguous. The storm is heading for Texas. But here is where it gets interesting. The United States Weather Bureau does not listen. Director Willis Luther Moore has blocked telegraph reports from Cuban meteorologists, partly due to political tensions after the Spanish-American War. American forecasters insist the storm will curve into Florida and the East Coast. They issue warnings for Florida, for Georgia, for the Carolinas, not Texas, not Galveston. On September 7th, Moore goes further. Even as the storm barrels across the Gulf with sustained winds of 145 miles per hour, a Category 4 hurricane by modern standards, Moore insists it is not of hurricane intensity. The city of Galveston sleeps. On the morning of September 8th, the skies over Galveston are only partly cloudy. Residents notice the Gulf swells are unusually large and persistent, but the weather looks almost normal, and that unremarkable sky is exactly why nobody leaves. Few people evacuate across the bridges to the mainland. Families go to work. Children go about their Saturday. Visitors stroll the beaches. Isaac Klein, the very man who wrote that a serious hurricane could never hit Galveston, the man who argued a seawall was unnecessary, now rides his horse along the beach, personally warning people to seek higher ground. Whether this was heroism or a desperate attempt to correct a decade of catastrophic overconfidence, historians still debate. What isn't debated is what happened next. By early afternoon, Gulf water is flooding the streets. By 5 in the evening, the wind gauge records 100 miles per hour, then blows off the building. All telegraph communication to the outside world goes dead. Galveston is completely cut off, and the storm hasn't even peaked yet. Between 6 and 8 p.m., the hurricane reached its maximum fury. A wall of water, a storm surge over 15 feet high, swept across the entire island. At 7:30 p.m., eyewitnesses reported the water rising 4 feet in just 4 seconds. 4 feet in 4 seconds. The island's highest point was 8 feet above sea level. There was nowhere to go. The surge did not announce itself. It did not give people time to climb to rooftops or to swim to safety. It arrived in the dark, during the peak of the storm, with winds of 120 miles per hour turning every piece of timber, every brick, every broken plank into a projectile. Entire neighborhoods were gone. Not damaged. Gone. The ground was swept as clean as if nothing had ever stood there. A survivor named August Rolfing returned to his neighborhood the next morning. He found nothing. Absolutely nothing. The ground was as clear of anything as if it had been swept, not even a little stick of wood for blocks and blocks. But the real story is deeper. At the west end of the island stood St. Mary's Orphans Asylum, run by the Sisters of Charity of the Incarnate Word. 93 children lived there, along with 10 nuns. As the water rose, the sisters moved the children into the newer, sturdier dormitory building. Realizing the end might be near, They tied themselves together, each sister binding 6 to 8 children to her body with clothesline so that no child would be swept away alone. The building collapsed. 3 children survived, clinging to a floating tree for 2 days. None of the sisters were found alive. In their final moments, they had tied themselves to the children they could not save. That image, 10 women lashing themselves to 90 children as the walls came down, is not a footnote. It is the human face of what 15 feet of storm surge actually means. When the sun rose on September 9th, Galveston looked like the end of the world. A 3-mile-long, 30-foot-high wall of debris with shattered homes, dead animals, and human bodies stretched across the middle of the island. Every bridge to the mainland had been destroyed. Every telegraph line was down. The city was an island within an island. The dead were everywhere, in the streets, floating in the bay, hanging in the trees. There were so many bodies that burial was impossible. Gangs of men, some conscripted at gunpoint, loaded corpses onto barges and dumped them at sea. When Gulf currents washed hundreds of bodies back to shore, the city pivoted to funeral pyres. Fires burned on the beaches for 6 weeks. The smoke hung over Galveston for a month and a half. At least 8,000 people were dead. That was 1 in 5 residents of the island. Some estimates put the toll as high as 12,000. The true number will never be known. More people died in Galveston that night than in the next 2 deadliest American hurricanes combined. Here's the part history doesn't always tell you. Galveston didn't just survive. It fought back in one of the most audacious engineering feats in American history. The city hired 3 engineers. They designed a seawall, 17 feet high, 10 miles long, and began construction in 1902. It was finished in stages over 60 years. But the seawall wasn't enough. So the city did something almost impossible to believe. They raised the entire island. Over 15 million cubic yards of sand were dredged from the seafloor and pumped under 2,100 buildings, including a Catholic church weighing 3,000 tons, lifting Galveston up to meet the height of the seawall. Some sections of the city rose by 17 feet. In 1915, a storm of similar strength struck. The seawall held. Instead of thousands dead, there were 8. The same city, a different outcome. Someone finally built the wall that residents had proposed and that officials had dismissed for years before 1900. That is the detail that refuses to let go. The seawall had been proposed before the storm. Residents raised it. Engineers supported it. And the city's leadership, backed by the confidence of Isaac Klein's famous declaration that a major hurricane simply could not strike Galveston, voted it down. The storm did not just kill 8,000 people. It killed 8,000 people who might have been protected by a wall that was never built because one man with institutional authority decided the threat was not real. And the haunting question, the one that outlasts the storm itself, is this. How many disasters in history are not natural at all? How many are just the moment when overconfidence finally meets the thing it was wrong about? Galveston built its seawall. It raised its island. It did everything right, 11 months too late. What does your city have waiting 11 months away? If this story stayed with you, the Johnstown flood, another American disaster driven by the arrogance of powerful men, is right here. 11 years earlier, just as devastating, and in some ways, even harder to forgive.